Welcome, everybody, into the Big Ten Show. Believe in the Big Ten. I am your host, Adam Carriker. Now, we've got a phenomenal guest we're going to bring on today. We got a lot of great things to talk about. All right, before we do that, I want to give a shout-out to our sponsors, the Jacobson Seed Company. They are your healthy hybrid advantage. Check them out at jacobsonseed.com. Also, Bonzel Pools. Check them out at bonzelpools.com. They've got pools, they've got hot tubs, they got saunas. Also, they can service your pools, hot tubs, saunas, and the like as well. And if you didn't know, my family's in the process of moving, which is why my background looks different than it's ever looked. Okay, and my wife's like, where are you going to record? The Packers, if you could see, are literally walking behind the computer here. So I was like, jam me in a corner. So she did. She jammed me in a corner. But I'm actually wondering why I haven't done it here before. It's actually quite cozy. All right, but Bonzel Pool, my point is they're actually putting in my family's pool in Lincoln where we are moving, so they do a great job. But I want to bring on our guest at this time. Now, he's done a great job, does a great job to this day at the NFL Network, Sirius XM, color analyst for Indiana football, played his days as a wide receiver for the Hoosiers as well. Also, an analyst for Raiders.com, did a great job breaking down the Raiders 2024 draft class. Now doing great things at the Big Ten Network. Mr. Rhett Lewis, how you doing, my friend?
Adam, what's up, man? Excited to chat with you, and excited because our, also our collegiate careers were actually pretty congruent. I was, I think, a class ahead of you, but we obviously weren't Big Ten kind of classmates at that point.
Not just yet.
Joined just a little bit later, but I'm wondering actually if when you got drafted to St. Louis, if you played with a buddy of mine, Victor Adianju.
Victor's one of my favorite people I've ever met. First of all, I've never met a human being who spends more time on a computer in my life.
He works for Microsoft now, by the way.
He does. Well, that makes sense. Dude, he's one of my favorite people. He did play at Indiana. That's right. One of my favorite people I've ever met, but go ahead.
Yeah, so he's awesome. I think he was like a fourth-round pick maybe a year before you, something like that, and played DN there for a few years, actually. Made a nice career for himself, obviously, as you did as well. And so I thought that was he was just one of those, came in as like a 230-pound, defensive lineman and left as like a 270-pound just beast, right? And so we were fortunate to have him, great character, and just one of those kind of great connections that you find throughout the Big Ten. One of which I suppose we're going to have a lot more of these connections now that we welcome in these 4 new teams and we join this big 18-team potluck conference, if you will.
First, potluck conference. I've never heard that, but I immediately like it. I'm going to steal that if that's okay. I like that a lot. Vic, man, he was, like you said, a year ahead of me, drafted a year ahead of me. They actually put me at nose guard, so he was a D end, I was a nose guard. So we did a lot of reps together when I first got there with the second team and so on. And he was always doing stuff on the computer. So one day, I'm like, Victor, how many hours a day do you spend on the computer? He goes, football day or non-football day? I was like, all right. Football day, where we're here like 8-9 hours a day. He goes, 5 hours. I was like, our day off? He goes 10. I was like, oh my God, that's crazy to me. So the fact that he works for Microsoft now makes perfect sense.
Yeah, no doubt. And so I've gotten to catch up with him a couple of times when IU was actually at a bowl game out west, out here where I live. And so I always like to keep in touch with those guys. I'm sure you do with your Nebraska teammates. And now looking forward to kind of forging this new relationship here, and excited to kind of share our paths and where we're kind of it's brought us, and
for sure.
Here we are at Believe in Big Ten.
Yeah, so I'm going to share a quick story about Victor, because I never get to talk about him. Okay, but I get a chance to talk about him, and then I want folks to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah.
So actually 2 quick stories. Number one, when he became a dad, I think either my second or third year in St. Louis, I've never seen an individual in my life more excited to be a dad. And then when his son was born, he came over to my house, of course, to help me with computers at some point. And then he's like, dude, I got to get home, my little guy. And he was just like so excited to get home. So that was kind of cool. But going into my second year, we did our training camp up at Wisconsin Whitewater. Okay. And he hurt his arm or hand, and he was out for like a week or 10 days. But then he was gone from the camp. He came back with like this ginormous club. First of all, that's back when you could do 2 days. He was fresh. And I hated him for being so fresh because I was dog tired. And he was running around just clubbing the crap out of offensive linemen. But anyways, that was kind of a story I've never forgotten about. But let's learn about you, because you've done a lot of great things to this point. You continue to do great things. Talk about the NFL Network, Sirius, how you're doing things here at the Big Ten Network and things of that nature.
Yeah, so it's like, I was when I finished playing, it was 2005, right? And had a great time. We didn't win a ton of games, but made some great relationships and still keep in touch with all my teammates. Most of my teammates from that time, and I had kind of always known that I wanted to be in football some way, shape, or form, right? And I declined to run the 40 at my pro day because I had a sprained thumb.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So that should tell you a little bit something. And I was like, you know what? And then I was like, this thing, my hamstrings aren't built for the NFL. I pulled a hamstring on the first morning of two-a-days, pretty much every fall camp. But and it wasn't going to happen, for me. And so I was like, how do I stay in the game, as best as I possibly can? And so sports media kind of was, the focus going into IU, and then it became a lot more clear once I finished playing. So jumped right into it. And my first job was in Lubbock, Texas, covering Texas Tech, Mike Leach and company back then. And
what year was that? Can I ask? What year was that?
My first year was 2006. So I don't.
So you were there for 70-10. Were you there for that game? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Proceed.
Yeah. There's another connection for us.
Yeah, Nebraska lost 70-10 when I was either a redshirt freshman or sophomore to Mike Leach, Texas Tech. Anyways, go ahead.
06 to 08, and kind of ironically, like I followed a lot of people that have played at Texas Tech at that time. Graham Harrell was the quarterback, who's now the offensive coordinator at Purdue. All these guys, that have kind of walked up in, Mike Leach's footsteps. Coach Lincoln Riley at USC was the wide receivers coach at that time. So we kind of reconnected on that once USC came out here. So I had a great 2 years there. I went to New Orleans, where I'm from, for a year. And then I was in Boston for 5 years. And then moved out to Los Angeles with the NFL Network for 10. And then have kind of added just a couple of other little, other little pieces of kind of media that I enjoy doing, and get a chance to spend more time around college football this way, which is, really where my passion is. And it's kind of become my niche at the NFL Network is, college football from the NFL perspective, as it then translates to the NFL draft, which is essentially a 24/7 deal starting in January. So that's kind of what's led me here. And I love any opportunity to talk about the Big Ten. And look, it's obviously a massive conference now, and it is a huge power player, as it's always kind of been. And really excited about what's to come this season, Adam. I mean, we got 18 teams. We got 4 new teams coming in. We've got a 12-team college football playoff, and I got a feeling the Big Ten is going to be well represented in that field.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look, and we're going to go through ESPN's post-spring top 25 with an emphasis on the Big Ten teams, but I mean, I want to chat about a few other teams as well. But like, you look at the top 25, the Big Ten has 5 of the teams. Most of them are top 10, top 15. Iowa's 23rd. I think they're the only one outside of the top 12. Okay, but you look
USC at 25.
Yes, USC.
Right.
Sorry, that actually might make team number 6. How did I miss them? And I'm not used to them being in the conference yet. So we actually,
like that's it. Like, it's going to take some time to figure this whole thing out, not just from like a football perspective, but from a recognition standpoint too.
So I completely left USC off the list because I'm not used to them being in the Big Ten yet. Oh, that's crazy. I got to make a note to fix that little error there. All right, so. Yeah, you look at the top 15, and 12 of the 15 teams are Big Ten SEC. And it's interesting, you look from 15 to 25, that's where you find all the Big 12 ACC teams. Out of those, I don't want to say the bottom 10, but the 15 to 25, top 25 post-spring ESPN teams,
that's where they're at.
7 of them are ACC Big 12, because the Big Ten and SEC are kind of hogging the top, so to speak, and then Notre Dame's kind of jam-packed in there. But let's start at the top. All right, I think right now, most people are like Georgia, Ohio State, Georgia, 1 and 2. ESPN, most people I think kind of err towards Georgia with Ohio State right on that cusp. ESPN has Georgia number 1, Ohio State number 2. I got to ask, your poll. Who would you put at number one? Way too early, just for fun, right here, right now in May.
I think I would stick with Georgia there. I think there's a few more proven commodities there, starting at the quarterback spot. You're talking about arguably, Heisman Trophy contender Carson Beck, and he's got a year of starting experience, at arguably the highest level. Obviously, they didn't quite make it to the CFP this year, but the fact that they're sitting there and he's back, and they're going to be, they've got a full boat roster. There's no weaknesses there. So I feel pretty comfortable there. Now I think Ohio State, like if you are skewing more towards talent that has come into the program, I think you got to look at Ohio State really hard. Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs, Will Howard comes in. So like that to me though is just a little bit, I don't want to say unproven because they're proven at their previous spots, right? But like putting it all together in Columbus, that makes me all right. Let's let them show us just a little bit, right? At number 2. And I'll put this one back to you there for Ohio State. Ryan Day has only lost to Michigan in the regular season, right? In terms of Big Ten opponents. So when you factor all that in, and the fact that the guy is one of the winningest coaches of this last decade, right? And now the pressure that he has been under, though, after 3 straight losses to Michigan and watching them then hoist the national championship trophy, is there a head coach with more pressure on them this year than Ryan Day?
That's actually in my notes. I've got Ohio State with the arrow up to Georgia question mark because I want to chat with you about that. And then I've got Ryan Day pressure question mark. That's literally the next thing on my list. Well, I don't think so. I don't think so. First of all, I'm curious to see how Will Howard does. There's other guys that are also there. You were talking about new guys coming in. Emeka Ibuka's back. You got Judkins, the running back. You've got 8 returning starters on defense. Okay, J.K. Dobbins, the running back. And you've got all this talent coming in, high expectations. People are sick of losing to Michigan. You haven't been to the Big Ten title game. Almost got to the national title game against Georgia a couple years ago, and then you watch Georgia just destroy TCU, and you're like, oh, we're a fake punt away. We're a fake punt away from being national champs. And so Ryan Day, in my opinion, it's going to work one of two ways. Either Ohio State is going to take the Michigan approach of a year ago, and I know Buckeye fans don't want to hear that, but it worked for Michigan, so if it works for Ohio State, they won't care. And that is they are uber motivated. All those guys came back from Michigan a year ago because they wanted to win a national title, and they did it. All these guys came back for Ohio State because they want to win a national title. Will they do it? The other question is, if they don't at least reach the national title game, I don't think Buckeye fans are going to be happy. At least reach it, play Georgia. If it's a close game you lose, they can live with that. Not what they want. But I think there's a lot of pressure. Anything else in that, do Buckeye fans consider it a failure for this year?
Man, it's the expectations are just, I don't want to say they're unrealistic because they are realistic based off the amount of resources the program has, the amount of success, generally speaking, that the program has had, over the course of its history, but certainly over the course of the last 10 years. And look, you are a product of your own expectations. Like, you deliver the success, the expectations are at the very top at a program like that. And look, Adam, coming from Nebraska, golly, after the run in the 90s, I mean, the expectations couldn't have been any higher year in and year out. And that's, and so you kind of have an idea of what it's like to live in those expectations too. And I just think that some of it on Ryan Day's plate feels a little unrealistic. Like, only one team wins this thing every year, and it's not the same team every year, even though, look, Alabama's been in the mix, just about every year that Nick Saban has been here. But I just think that Ryan Day is a damn good football coach. And before anyone tries to run him out of town, if they don't win the national title, you better look and see what it's like on the other side, because the grass ain't always greener. And I think a lot of schools end up finding that out. Fire somebody. I mean, look, and I don't mean to bring your alma mater back into the conversation here.
Go ahead.
Frank Solich was winning like crazy. It just wasn't. They weren't national titles, and now it's kind of been this time in the desert until hopefully Matt Rule gets this thing really rocking and rolling, like they were on the cusp of doing a year ago. So I just say be careful what you wish for if you think that Ryan Day isn't the person to lead that program, because here we are sitting here talking about him as the number 2 potentially number one team in the country going into the year, and they will be right there at the end. I have no doubt, especially in a 12-team playoff. They're going to have every opportunity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think if you're a Buckeyes fan, hey, this team better be in the Big Ten championship, if not winning. Those are the expectations. They better at least get to the Final Four, if not the national championship. And they do have the talent to win it all. Ryan Day is a good college football coach. They've got the motivation. Guys came back for certain reasons to win games. Okay. For me, my biggest question mark with Ohio State, outside of the whole team gelling and how do they respond to the hype and the pressure and things of that nature, is Will Howard. The dude's a good quarterback. The dude can make more plays with his he's more plays with his legs than they've had in a quarterback able to do recently. In all fairness, he's also a guy that maybe got outplayed a smidge at Kansas State by a freshman a year ago. So he's got more talent, obviously. No disrespect to anyone at Kansas State. They had a great season, lots of talent. But Ohio State's talent is like top 2 or 3 in the country, and I'm curious to see what he can do with his legs and with his arm. What are your thoughts on Will Howard and how he may or may not perform this upcoming season and the pressure on him?
Well, he's going to have some pressure because there's some high-profile people behind him, right? And Julian Sayin, who comes in from Alabama, and then you've got, Aaron Noland, who is a, very highly recruited freshman, was actually part of the I don't want to say fallback, but plan, 1A, 1B after the Dylan Raiola thing didn't work out for Ryan Day and Ohio State. So the way I look at Will Howard is this is the guy who led Kansas State to a Big 12 championship, and he ended up going to the college football playoff, right? And so I think he reminds me a little bit of the guy he ended up beating in that Big 12 championship game in Max Duggan. Like he's got some real gritty competitor to him, right? He's got a little bit, when he's going to run it, you're going to feel it, right? He's a bit more of a physical runner than a, kind of scat around, make guys miss type of thing. So yeah, I think he can make some plays on the ground. And I think the thing that I wrote next to him is he will benefit from the talent around him in a big, big way. And so, as you mentioned, Mecca Buka's still there. You want to talk about, the incredible freshman class that continues to feed into the incredible depth and talent at wide receiver, for Ohio State. And then that running back combination, my God, Quinshon Judkins and then Travion Henderson, both those dudes back and ready to rock and roll. Like that is going to be incredible to watch. And so I'm really excited. I think he's got some pressure on him for sure. But again, I think that supporting cast around him really helps.
I said the wrong running back name twice. Travion Henderson. I had all these Ohio State backs in my head. Thank you for helping me out there.
Yeah.
Chip Kelly. That guy has not been talked about hardly at all.
Point.
You're the head coach at another Big Ten team now, which is still funny for me to say, but UCLA, and you go to Ohio State to be the offensive coordinator. I mean, in my opinion, he's the best offensive coordinator in America. He's got a quarterback who can make plays with his arms and his legs like he likes to have, particularly from his days at Oregon. Okay, and I'm curious to see what kind of a difference he can make. Does Ohio State go more up-tempo? Okay, like Chip Kelly. They used to, when he was at Oregon, they tried to snap the ball every 18 seconds. Will they try to do something like that? Will it be more of a UCLA type offense? I'm curious to see, and they weren't slow at UCLA, but it wasn't quite the same as Oregon. I'm curious to see how he utilizes Will Howard's skill set and the talent that they have, and how much of an impact do you think Chip Kelly makes? Because I think he is a big difference maker.
Yeah. So the thing that I would say on Chip Kelly is I think you've got to be prepared for a variety of tempos, right? Because they can speed it up and go, IndyCar and go really, really fast. They can slow it down a little bit more than NASCAR tempo, right? And then they can, I don't know that you're going to see them huddle up very much, but you could see a little bit more of a controlled pace and kind of understanding, when they want to make sure that they can milk the clock with Travion and with Quinshon Judkins and let that offensive line eat a little bit, that they could do that too. So I would say get ready for a variety of tempos there. And I do think that you're going to see a real emphasis on the run game this year, especially with those two talented backs. They're the most talented backs in the country when Travion's healthy. Now, Travion hadn't been fully healthy for a full year since his freshman year when he was incredible and, was one of the best players in the conference as a true freshman. So I think that that's the part of this Ohio State offense that is a little bit underappreciated at this point is their ability and commitment to winning games on the ground this year. Not to say that they can't throw it around and that Will Howard can't throw it around. But I think that they're going to utilize, his ability to command the offense, to understand what's going on around him, and to be okay handing it off for 5, 6, 7 yards a pop.
All right, number 3, number 4, they've got Texas, then Oregon, another Big Ten team. Okay, Texas. I mean, to me, the top 4 teams just on paper are fairly simple. How you rank them, 1 and 2. I think most people have Georgia, Ohio State, Georgia. Okay, and I think most people have Oregon, Texas, Oregon, 3, 4, however you want to rank. I think 1 through 4 on paper is fairly simple, at least for most people. It is for me. They have Texas 3rd. My big question when it comes to Texas, and then we'll get to Oregon. All right, Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning. Is that going to become in any way, shape, or form? And Sarkisian so far has made it clear that Ewers is the quarterback, and then Arch Manning goes out and threw, 375 yards in a spring game, but it caught everyone's attention. Okay, is there any way you think this could turn into, I'm not wishing it on them, because I think this cost them a spot in the national title game in 2001, but a major Applewhite, Chris Sims type situation?
You know what? I don't see it that way. I don't. I think that it was really beneficial for Arch to kind of understand what he's capable of at this level when given the reins. Always nice to perform when the spotlight's on you and to show folks like, look, we're going to be okay. And remember, Quinn Ewers didn't play every game last year. And a lot of times you need to have you need to have 2 quarterbacks that can come out and play in this league. And especially as they go to the SEC and things get even more physical there, with the meat grinder of a schedule that they're going to have throughout that conference. I think it's going to be to their benefit to be able to rely on 2 quarterbacks, but I think this is Quinn's show. And I think Arch is understanding of that. And unless there is some, wild regression from Quinn Ewers in fall camp, which I don't see happening at this point. I mean, to me, we're talking about the best quarterbacks in the country right now. You're looking at Dylan Gabriel. You're looking at Carson Beck. You're looking for sure at Quinn Ewers. And so like those are, 3 of the top quarterbacks in the country, in my opinion. So I don't see a true, controversy here, I guess, unless they falter early against Michigan. Like, could that be something that maybe causes some concerns, And he throws like 3 picks or something, right?
Yeah.
And they get blown out. That's the only way I see it happen.
Yeah, I agree. Unless they falter early, I think it's Quinn Ewers' show. I mean, people forget he was the number 1 recruit in the entire country when he came out. Went to Ohio State, signed a big NIL deal, one of the first ever, then comes back home to Texas.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. And when Scott Frost went to Stanford and came back to Nebraska, there was a little bit of you didn't choose us at first. Now all that's way in the past, obviously, but I wonder if there's a little bit of that, at least when Ewers first came back to Texas, because there wasn't quite the excitement I thought that there would be. Obviously, that was a few years ago. Okay, I think Sark has handled this really well. He's come out and said it's Ewers' team. Okay, it's Ewers' team. So the only way it's not is if things just don't go well.
And by the way, they're really good friends. Like Arch and Quinn, like they're tight. Like I got to be around both of them the last couple of summers at the Manning Passing Academy. Like they're attached at the hip. Like there does not seem to be any animosity between those two. And I think that's also something that fuels, these controversies, as well, when those 2 guys don't support each other the way that you'd like to see.
Yeah, that's the quickest way to divide a locker room.
Yes.
When they can see that the top 2 quarterbacks who may or may not be competing, well, they're always competing for that spot, but one guy is kind of nipping at another guy's heels potentially, that's the quickest way to divide a locker room. And it's not interesting to me, but I'm going to point it out anyways. The top 4 teams in the country, and you said 3 of the top quarterbacks in the country, 3 of them belong to this team. And that's why kind of my question about Will Howard a little bit earlier, because he's a good quarterback. I'm just curious to see how he can ultimately play. Oregon, this is a team that years ago, when they were under Chip Kelly, as an example, he did a phenomenal job, got him to the national title game, obviously, versus Auburn, Pac-12 title games, the wars with Stanford and Harbaugh and Luck, and then, going to the Rose Bowl. They've always had speed.
Yeah.
I used to say they were too fast, and then I'd pause just so people could give me a weird look, and then I'd finish the sentence because they were too small. Because when they'd play a team with speed and size, a la those bowl games, and they were playing like Ohio State in the Rose Bowl and Auburn and Cam Newton in the national championship game, so it's not like they weren't playing good teams, but they get pushed around.
Yeah.
And so had those teams come over to the Big Ten, I think they would have struggled. They're still good teams, still good records, would have competed, at a high level, but this Oregon team under Dan Lanning is built for the Big Ten. Big offensive line, physical, play good defense. It's a different type of mentality that they have, just not better, maybe better suited for the Big Ten than what Chip Kelly had, but it's just different. And I think it fits the Big Ten. They're big up front, they're physical, and they're a Big Ten team coming to the Big Ten, and they've also got some speed. And by the way, maybe the best quarterback in America, like you said, one of the top 3. What are your thoughts on Oregon?
Yeah, I think Oregon is as talented as any team in this conference. Like, and I don't think there's any reason to think that ranking at 4 is overdone. Like, I think they're right up there, and I think it's going to be a banner year for them to really make some hay and plant a flag in the Big Ten. And I'm really excited to see what they're going to do. And they're going to bring, teams to Autzen Stadium, that have never been there before and have never seen how loud it can get in that place. And I think it's going to be a really fun year for Oregon in the Big Ten. I'm really excited to see what Dylan Gabriel does. I think he could very easily win the Heisman Trophy this year. Looking at what Bo Nix did a year ago, I think that Dylan Gabriel might actually even be a little bit more pure of a passer than Bo Nix was. So they push the ball down the field a touch more, and you see a few more of those explosive style plays. Like, I think this Oregon team, they brought some transfers into that I think are going to help on the offensive skill position side. Like, they've got a lot to really feel good about. Sure, they lose Troy Franklin. Sure, they lose Bucky Irving and Bo. But, man, it doesn't feel like – I feel better about them replacing some of their pieces than I do about Michigan replacing some of their pieces.
Yep.
Let's put it that way, because Michigan is, 6 spots behind at 10?
Number 10, yep.
And I think that's about right, because I think Oregon is better suited to replace some of the holes in their roster than Michigan was.
So you talk about, I looked up their schedule real quick. So I love, if I'm an Oregon fan, I don't know that I love this, but as a college football fan, I love that they kept the game versus Boise State. A lot of power 4, 2 teams, however you look at the conferences now. I want to avoid a game like that. They also kept the in-state rivalry with Oregon State. I wonder how much longer that's going to last, but for now they're keeping it. Michigan State comes to Eugene. All right, Ohio State, which I'm going to go way out on no limb whatsoever and say it's a preview of the Big Ten championship game, is going to be coming to Eugene. Okay, Illinois, and then you got the Michigan game in Ann Arbor on November 2nd. Maryland, enjoy that cross-country trip.
That's right.
Then they're gonna go to Madison, Wisconsin, and then they're gonna finish with their new biggest rival. Although most Oregon fans would have told you this was their biggest rivalry for years. Washington at home to end the regular season. Yeah, you look at this Oregon team. I said it. It's going to be them or Ohio State, and I think it comes down to how well they handle the pressure in Columbus. Okay, how big of a difference does Chip Kelly make, and what can Will Howard do? Because Oregon, they just had the best recruiting class they've ever had. Lanning's been recruiting at a very high level, which is why you feel comfortable about them replacing some of the guys who left. I think Oregon is for real. I think Ohio State this is crazy to say, may have a little bigger upside, but they've got a few more question marks, if you will. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, number 5 is Notre Dame. They're not a Big Ten team. I'm just going to ask you this question. Yeah. Should they join a conference? What are your feelings on them having their cake and eating it too all the time?
I think that they're going to get left behind in terms of these automatic qualifiers into the college football playoff. Like, I think that's one of the huge benefits now as we go to this 12-team format is getting in. And what do they do at this point? I mean, surely there have been the overtures from the Big Ten to see, like, hey, is it time now? Do you guys want to do this? Is now the time to join the Big Ten? I know they went into the ACC during the COVID year, and I thought that was fine. I highly doubt that they would join any other conference but the Big Ten at this point. I mean, I don't see them joining the SEC. I don't see the SEC, really jumping in to that boat there, but I don't see them going back to the ACC and being like, yeah, let's do this. To me, the only position of strength that they would have better than where they are now is to move into the Big Ten. I'd love to see it. I don't think we're going to. I
want them in the Big Ten. I miss Michigan State, Notre Dame every year. Notre Dame every year when I was growing up as a kid. Yep. And I know it wasn't a big national rivalry, but Purdue and Notre Dame, the Indiana rivalry, those games were usually close and at least competitive.
USC, Notre Dame now could be a conference game.
Exactly. Right? That's a great point.
Yeah.
So Now, I will play devil's advocate because right now the ACC is just letting Notre Dame walk all over them. Sure, you want to be in a conference in all these sports that Sure, why not? Oh, you don't want to be in our conference in football? Okay, you can just punch us in the face and kick us between the legs, and that's fine. Just play 5 of our teams every year. We'll call it good. So Notre Dame, for right now, they get to have their cake and eat it too, and I don't like it, but I can't really hate on them because I always like more cake, so why wouldn't they? I will say this. I'm going to play devil's advocate in this. Geographic location, as we know, doesn't matter at all. It makes sense for them to go to Notre Dame. But we're talking about Florida State possibly coming to the Big Ten just as likely as they are the SEC. Miami, Clemson, North Carolina, okay, all this conference realignment potentiality that's coming down the road. I could see Notre Dame saying, hey, we're worth X amount. The SEC's making X amount. We can get more national coverage. I don't know if NBC would be involved in this or not. Obviously, the SEC's got their connections with ESPN, et cetera. But I think they could maybe make more money with the SEC because it extends the national brand. Am I crazy on this or not?
No, I don't. I just think that there's too much of a there's too much natural. I don't want to say rivalries, but I mean, it is a little bit. There's too much like natural pull built into the Big Ten for Notre Dame. As you mentioned, Michigan State, Michigan, right? Mm-hmm. Now USC's here. You bring that rivalry in and like you jump in there and you're not, completely blowing up the schedule based off some of the teams that they're already playing on a yearly basis anyway. So like, I think about those matchups and that kind of making things a little bit easier to integrate. But look, the Big Ten is a coast to coast brand. It's a nationwide brand at this point, right? From the shores of Jersey to Southern California, like we're everywhere. Do we get a foothold in Florida at some point with Florida State? Did we go up into the mid-Atlantic and try to get Clemson in too now? Like maybe, and nice even round number at 20. I could certainly see that, but then where does Notre Dame fit? So at this point, it's Big Ten or bust for me with Notre Dame.
So we finally disagree on something. I do think the Big Ten's a logical location, destination potentially. I just think there's more money to be made with the SEC, and I think there's I'm going to go 49% chance that they could go to the SEC.
Okay, 49
potentially, just because it's all about money, as you and I know. All right. Sure. Alabama at number 7. I know they're SEC, and I don't mean to skip over some of these teams, but there's either got to be something that stands out about them or they got to be a Big Ten. So Alabama, no Nick Saban, Kalen DeBoer, a lot of players left, a lot of talent still there. Quick thoughts on Bama before we move on.
I would just say that I'd put Kalen DeBoer right up there with Ryan Day in terms of head coaches with a lot of pressure on him, right?
That's true.
I mean, now, should you have that kind of pressure being in your first year? Probably not, but You're replacing Nick Saban.
Yep.
And, like the expectations don't go down just because Saban's not there. Like it's Alabama football and they better contend for a national title. And I don't know what kind of, patience they're going to be given there, but I imagine it's not a whole lot. I think Kalen's a great coach. I think he hired some great coordinators. Nick Sheridan, I know very well. Kane Womack is one of my good friends, and he is a fantastic defensive coach, a defensive coordinator. I think they're going to do a really good job. I hope that they're given just a little bit of leeway to kind of, figure things out just a little bit here, right? Mm-hmm. And but I think that they're 100% a CFP, playoff, a college football playoff contender without question.
I think Kalen DeBoer is the perfect hire for Alabama. Now, Alabama fans, they feel some kind of way with their expectations, and my God, you're coming off right off Nick Saban. I can't blame you. And I will go back to Nebraska with this. So Bob Devaney builds up Nebraska. They win the title 70-71, and within a year or two, Tom Osborne takes over, does nothing but win 9 games every year, finishes highly ranked. By the time 1978 rolled around, Colorado was flirting, made him an offer. He about went. He's a Nebraska guy. Yeah. Went to college in Hastings, grew up in the state of Nebraska. Okay, the expectations, there was a lot of heat coming his way because he hadn't won a national championship. He about went to Colorado in 78. Now, he stayed because he, just him and his high character. He's like, I've been telling these kids out of high school, this is the best place to come to Nebraska, so how can I leave and go somewhere else? That's ultimately why he stayed. And it turns out he just might have been the right guy 25 years later, more wins throughout a quarter of a century than anybody. I hope Bama fans, because I firmly believe they've got the right guy, have patience and don't make a similar kind of sort of mistake. And I'm not saying they will unless the L's come early, and then who knows. All right, Utah, and I have them outlined because they're the only team in a conference, and I had to phrase it this way because of Notre Dame, in a conference that's not the Big Ten and SEC that's inside the top 10, the only team. So what are your thoughts on Utah? They get their quarterback back. They actually want to play defense and be physical, unlike most teams in the Big 12. Those are my quick thoughts, I guess. What are yours?
I think Utah is, in my opinion, has been the favorite to win the Big 12 this year. And I think they've got a really good chance to do it. And I look at where that program, has that steady hand that has led that program, and Kyle Whittingham. I think that program understands the culture that head coach wants to play with, that wants to, kind of go about their business with better than almost anybody. Like, they win football games like you said, they're going to win 10 games a year. They're going to compete for the conference championship. And this year they're going to be a college football playoff contender because of it. And so I love what Kyle Whittingham has done in Utah over the last, 10 years. Cam Rising now back. I think that gives him as good a chance as anybody to find their way into, one of those automatic qualifiers in this college football playoff format.
I think Kyle Whittingham is the most underrated football coach in America. Okay.
Yes.
And then you look at Cam Rising. Think about the Rose Bowl. Was that 2 years ago? I don't think it was 3 when they played Penn State. Yeah. They were neck and neck. I had no idea who was going to win as soon as he went out. Penn State they were the better team. It wasn't even close. Yeah. You look at what Utah, and they had some ugly games last year. Oregon State wasn't great, yada, yada. But what they did without him, without their best quarterback and most important player, they still had a really good season. Now he's back. So and here's the thing about Utah, okay, and I smile when I say this because they're ultimately going to change this down the road. But if they win the Big 12, they're a top 4 seed with a first round bye. Yes. Okay, even if they're like 12th in the country, it doesn't matter. They're going to be a top 4 seed. Right, yeah, right. For this year anyway. Yeah. So, all right, Michigan, number 10. Now, Coach Moore, they hired the right head coach, but it's going to be a little similar to Kalen DeBoer in the expectations. How do the fans handle that in his first year as the official head coach?
Yeah, and I think this is good because this is a continuity situation for Michigan. Yep. I love that they hired Sharon Moore. I think he showed you in a very unorthodox format what he can do as a head coach and how he can
very unorthodox.
Right? Yep. I mean, he was a trial by fire, right? It had a nice six game audition and went 6-0 and worked out pretty damn well. Yep. I love that they're keeping so much of what Jim Harbaugh brought to this program in bringing it back to national prominence by keeping Sharon Moore. He keeps his grasp on the offensive line, on the offense, on the play, on the way that they want to attack defenses. And I just look at, you look at the Penn State game, right, last year where in the second half they, ran the ball 35 times, whatever it was in a row.
Didn't throw it once. Yep, didn't throw it once.
Game.
Yep.
So I look at that's a dude who knows what it takes, and he doesn't care. Like he knows what it takes to win. It's like, this is how we're going to win this football game. I don't care if it looks pretty or not, but I know we can win the game this way, and that's what we're going to do. And that is a really important quality in a head football coach, especially the coach of a very talented football team and a very proud football program. So I think Michigan's in great hands. I think that they have a lot to prove when it comes to, one, the quarterback spot, even though, let's be honest, they did not ask the world out of J.J. McCarthy from a quarterback standpoint the last 2 years. Now, he did exactly what they asked him to do and performed and executed very well. Is Alex Orji the same guy? Can he do that? I don't know. Is Jack Tuttle, who is a very talented passer, has had real issues staying healthy throughout his career. And so, I don't know if they have their pilot yet for this offense. I know that Donovan Edwards is going to be fed early, often, and always. For this Michigan team. There's a reason that dude is front and center on the NCAA 25 EA Sports game, right? He's going to be a Heisman contender as well. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. I think their defense is going to be fine. Their defensive tackles are as good as any team in college football with Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham. Will Johnson will be one of the better corners in this conference, if not the country this year. They got a lot to like there. I'm okay. It's just the quarterback thing. I want to see how that plays out.
Yeah, so I've mentioned it a million times, so I'm not going to on this show, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing again. Bunch of offensive linemen gone, obviously the quarterback. Now they lose their starting running back, but Donovan Edwards looked pretty good in the national title
Starting
game.
caliber, yeah.
Yeah, any time he got the chance to play 2 years ago, okay. I mean, there was no drop off. It's probably even a little better acceleration, top end speed, great back. Okay, but you lose Coach Harbaugh, your strength coach, $1 million strength coach, things of that nature, defensive coordinator. There's a lot gone, difficult schedule. I pulled it up real quick. Fresno State, I mean, they were ranked for a good portion of last year.
Fresno,
Texas, yeah, Texas. That's going to be obviously huge in Ann Arbor. Then you got USC. All right, Washington is only 2 returning starters, but it's going to be in Seattle, and those people are going to remember the national title game. That's going to be a crazy atmosphere. Yeah. Michigan State, I mean, obviously you got the little brother, big brother rivalry. Oregon in Ann Arbor, Ohio State. I mean, they got a pretty tough schedule. Figuring out the quarterback position, like you mentioned, Alex Orji, he's an athlete. He can make plays, not a proven passer.
Right.
Okay, the next man up, passes a little better. How consistent can he be in just being on the field? So it's interesting to me. I think they're going to be one of those teams that's fighting to get into the college football playoff. I think their biggest enemy might just be the schedule, if nothing else.
Might be the conference, right?
Yes, exactly.
And in turn, the schedule, as you're saying, because they could, the winning back to back is going to be pretty tough this year, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they made 3 in a row in terms of Big Ten championships, which in any other year would give them that spot in the CFP. This year, though, I think they're going to find some real competition, for that spot with Oregon, with, obviously with Ohio State, who's always there. And then, I think we're going to have to watch out for this Penn State team too, which is coming down the pipe next.
Yep. So obviously Michigan finishes the year with Ohio State, but that's in Columbus this year. And actually, I wanted to chat real quick about Florida State before we get to Penn State at number 12. Just quick thoughts. How much of a part does vengeance and revenge play for Florida State this year after getting snubbed out of the CFP last year? And they are the first ACC team to appear on this top 25 list as well. What are your quick thoughts on the Seminoles?
Yeah. Again, the quarterback spot will be one to follow, right? And how that ends up working out. Obviously, they were derailed by injuries a year ago. I think this is a great roster. They lost some prime players, right? Jared Verse, Braden Fisk up front, arguably the best, defensive end, defensive tackle combo, in the country a year ago. They end up both going to the LA Rams, coincidentally, in the draft, which I thought was pretty damn cool.
Yep.
But looking at Florida State, I think Mike Norvell is a great coach. I think they've, he's really, kind of backstopped the recruiting, and like they are going to be, up there in the top 10 every year now. And that's just, and that wasn't the case, necessarily the last few years. So I'm glad to see that that's back. And I think they're going to be a contender for sure. I would give them the best chance to win the ACC. I mean, they're the highest ranked ACC team in this poll at this point, but Clemson not too far behind. I think that their talent pipeline is going to separate itself is basically the gist of that. And I think Norvell's a good enough coach to bring it all together.
Yeah, I agree with you. Number 13 is NC State. So
that's
the
right.
next closest. Yep. And then Clemson's number 16.
Yeah.
As we sit here and talk in May. So last question, and it's more of a conference realignment question when it comes to Florida State. Clemson, North Carolina, Florida State. First of all, is the ACC going to survive? And if they don't, where do those 3 teams, and Virginia, that seems to be the 4th most sought-after team in the ACC, where do they go, in your opinion?
I think somebody's going to the Big Ten, and I think Florida State seems to be the most likely, team or university at this point to make that jump. Clemson, has obviously had some frustrations, right? And, there's some prestige there, but I think you also, and Dabo Swinney is a phenomenal coach, but he is a very principled coach as well.
No transfer portal players this year. None.
No NIL, or not no NIL, but like they're not using NIL the way that other blue bloods, if you want to call it that, are in college football. So is that sustainable? And, what else are you bringing Clemson in for? Because it's not just a football decision, right? When you're doing this, I mean, obviously that's a big piece of the revenue question. I'd look at UNC too, because you're talking about a solid football team, a solid football program capable of winning 9-10 games every year. And you look at the basketball program too, and you put that into the Big Ten, and my goodness, right? That would be pretty incredible, to watch. And obviously, they would lose the Duke rivalry. I don't know if they would ever want to do that. So I look at Florida State and Clemson as probably the two most likely, but I'd keep an eye on UNC.
So personally, I view UNC as potentially the most appealing brand. As you mentioned, talk about more than just football, the brand. They may be the most appealing brand. And what's interesting, I listed Virginia fourth, not Miami of Florida.
That's right.
I wonder if they somehow aren't included in, like, the Big 12 is a fine conference. It's not one of the top two, but if somehow they end up in the Big 12, if the ACC doesn't survive. But let's get to the next Big Ten team on the slate, Penn State. This is the team. Drew Aller is considered one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Their passing game was not great, to put it kindly, last year. Not all of that was on him. There wasn't a lot of separation from the receivers. They've had a bunch of receivers transfer even since their spring game. Their defense was lights out last year. A lot of talent at the running back spot. They can run the ball. But what are your thoughts on Penn State as a whole and trying to become a contender with teams like Ohio State, Oregon, and Michigan this year for that Big Ten championship?
12-team playoff the last 3 years. Penn State makes the playoff all 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They're a 10-game team. They've lost to Michigan and Ohio State every time, but they don't, because those are their only 2 losses, they end up, ranked in the top 12 in those final rankings each and every year. So this is a great year for Penn State. Like, they have a good team. They have a good roster. I think, Abdul Carter making the switch from off the ball linebacker down to this kind of hybrid pass rusher role that Tom Allen, new defensive coordinator, brings in, I think is going to be very beneficial. Great athlete, big physical body player. I think he's going to do really well over there if he can kind of refine some of those pass rushing moves. It's not just, you can't just, put a good athlete over there and hope he can, bend and get around a tackle. Like, there's got to be some nuance involved. And I think that they'll hopefully coach that up enough to where he can be a big time impact player there. Obviously they've had secondary players every year. That pipeline is strong. Their defense is fine. Drew Aller.
That's the question.
Not as good as people wanted him to be, but better than people gave him credit for a year ago. Does that make sense? Right? Because
that's why I put some of the blame on the receivers too. But go ahead.
Sure. And, did the offense fit his skill set? And again, this is an offense that wants to run the ball with Katrin Allen and Nick Singleton. And, those 2 guys who went over 1,000 yards as true freshmen, and last year wasn't necessarily as productive on the ground. They lost some offensive linemen too now, so they've got to replace that crew up front, starting with Olu Fashanu, at left tackle, who was an all Big Ten player the last 2 years. But I think Drew Aller, with Andy Kotelnicki as the new offensive coordinator, is really intriguing to me. All the talent in the world, all the skills in the world. Does he mesh better with this play caller and with this system? And do they allow him the flexibility and the opportunity to really push the ball down the field with guys like Julian Fleming, who come in, from Ohio State and immediately became the best wide receiver on the roster, which I think is why a few of those guys defected anyway, like Keandre Lambert-Smith and company. He's like, oh, this dude's going to be the dude. So we're going to go find our way somewhere else. So I'm really curious about Penn State, but I think they're a playoff team.
Yeah, I mean, as it sits right now, they'd be in at number 12.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not directly related to the rankings. There could be a G5 team that's number 19 that's in over them, but that's a topic for a whole nother day, and I look forward to chatting about that.
Yeah.
But you're right. Julian Fleming, the number 1 wide receiver in the entire country when he came out of high school, went to Ohio State. Now he's at Penn State. This is his chance. Loaded Ohio State wide receiver rooms. Okay, Harrison, Emeka Ibuka, all these guys. Now this is his chance. You got a highly touted quarterback in Drew Aller who's looking for his chance to kind of break out. And you're right, their leading receiver from a year ago at Penn State, Keandre Lambert-Smith, entering the transfer portal. All right, wide receiver Malik McClain, who originally transferred in from Florida State's in the portal. So they've had some guys leave. Hopefully, if you're a Penn State fan, that's because some other guys, including Mr. Fleming, are stepping up as well. Okay, let's see. Number 23, we got 2 teams left. We were supposed to get to the quarterbacks in the Big Ten.
We'll get to that next time.
Yeah, I was going to say, come on next week. We'll get to that next week.
Yeah.
Last 2 teams. Yeah. All right. My personal good buddies from Iowa. I've always got to take a friendly jab at them. It would help a lot more if Nebraska ever actually won. I mean, yes, we did 2 years ago. But a little more consistently, it would make my life easier. I'm just going to do it. I got no ground to stand on. I don't care. It's fun. All right, they got 8 starters returning on defense. They're talking 9-10 wins again. Okay.
They do.
Yeah, they got a new playbook, new offensive coordinator, Tim Lester, Cade McNamara, who, when we get to the quarterbacks, he's my quarterback in the Big Ten with the most to prove. All right. Transferred from Michigan, coming to Iowa. They had the worst offense in the country last year. Not entirely his fault, or his ACL limited this spring. Hopefully full go in the fall should be. But he's got the most to prove. They got a new offensive coordinator, new offensive playbook. Defense, solid. Special teams, solid. Don't beat themselves. Very disciplined. But can they score points on offense? That's the question. Okay. And preseason number 23, where they have 10 wins a year ago. I know the bowl game against Tennessee didn't go great, but they find ways to win games even when they don't score points. What are your thoughts on Iowa?
I think the biggest departure that they got to deal with is Tory Taylor, their punter, leaving. And
that's a great point. Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like Tory Taylor gets drafted. I mean, like, he was their biggest weapon in terms of field position and putting that defense at a good spot to wreak havoc and score points.
Yep.
Which they really needed the last few years. Now Tim Lester comes in. I think, Kirk Ferentz's, hiring there. I think initially maybe it was like, oh, that's not the kind of flash and pizzazz that you were maybe hoping after, years and years of offensive mediocrity. But I think what Iowa fans are maybe latching onto is Kirk saying this is no longer the Ferentz playbook that Tim Lester is going to be executing. This is going to be Tim Lester's playbook, Tim Lester's offense. He's done some good things in his career. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. But I would actually push back on you a little bit on Cade McNamara as the pilot of this offense and as the quarterback, because I think he's shown us who he is. And he is a solid quarterback. I think he is a solid quarterback capable of guiding an offense on a really good team to win a lot of games. I don't know that you can sit back there at this point, and maybe, Adam, he proves that to us this year. But I don't know that you can sit back there like another couple of guys as I would rank these 1 through 18 below Cade and say, I don't know that you can count on him to go out there and win you a football game. I don't know that you can count on him to go out there with under 2 minutes to play and fire that football around the field and find ways to get first downs and score a touchdown when you absolutely need it. I haven't seen yet. And he's been around college football for a long time now.
Yep. So
maybe he could still prove that to us. But at this point, I feel like I know who Cade McNamara is. He's solid, but not spectacular.
For Iowa, it's amazing to me with the porous offense that they've had for quite a while, honestly, that they still find ways to win 8, 9, 10 games every year. Everything I said earlier, great defense, phenomenal special teams, not going to beat themselves, physical, going to win the turnover battle. What happens if they actually score a decent amount of points? I'm not rooting. Yeah, as a Nebraska guy, I'm not rooting for that. As a college football fan, I'm very interested, though.
I do too.
Last team, and I'm not going to leave them off because they are in the Big Ten, whether I am used to it or not. All right, USC. My big thing, and I've mentioned this before, so I'll let you. I'll give my initial thoughts, and I'll let you take it away. All right, Miller Moss. Right now, a lot of people think he's one of the top 4 quarterbacks in the Big Ten. They lit up the scoreboard versus Louisville. I think Louisville was a little bit overmatched. The question is, USC is going to score. The question is, can they match physicality? Can they play in cold weather? And are they going to tackle it all this year? And I know Lincoln Riley said they're starting over in a lot of areas, like it's year 1, in particular on defense. This is a team, it all comes down to defense. Like with Iowa, it all comes down to offense. With this team, it's like the polar opposite. Do they play each other this year? I'd love to watch that game. Yeah. Are they going to play any defense this year? And that's the big key with USC.
I think their defense is going to be vastly improved. Danton Lynn is a rising star in college football. Did wonders for USC's defense a year ago. Has a NFL background coming from the Ravens. His dad is Anthony Lynn, who was obviously a head coach for the LA Chargers and has been around the block, in the NFL for a number of different teams as an offensive assistant. Danton is a tremendous communicator. His guys understand what is expected of them. I was there in person for the USC spring game this year. I watched them force 5 turnovers against the USC offense in one half of play.
Oh, wow.
5 turnovers, 4 interceptions, 1 fumble. One of the picks was returned for a score. Miller Moss threw 2 of those picks. Jaden Maeva threw 1, and then the third string quarterback threw another one. I think Lincoln Riley is one of the best offensive minds, that we've seen in recent college football history. They're going to find a way to score points. I'm not worried about that. But I would say this defense is going to bring them to a point where they can once again contend. I don't know that the skill players are all the way there where USC would like to have them. Obviously, Zachariah Branch, a tremendous player, punt returner, playmaker with the ball in his hands. They bring in, some transfers, the running back spot. Like, I just don't know if it's all there yet offensively from a skill position standpoint. The one thing I know is that defense is going to force turnovers. They're going to create havoc, and they're going to put the offense in better positions to score. So I look at this USC team as an 8 to 10 win football team this year.
If USC can just force a few turnovers like you've talked about and steal a few possessions, that would be huge. I mean, sometimes, obviously, you want your defense to get stops and get the ball back via punt. But if you're not great at doing that just yet, not proven at doing it, I should say, okay, at least steal a few possessions for your offense and give them some good opportunities to score. USC does not play Iowa this year. I looked it up real quick. I would have been very intrigued by that game.
Yeah,
all right, man.
Yeah,
this was fun.
I agree.
I appreciate you joining me. And you're going to come on next week, do it again, possibly? All right.
Let's do it again. Let's talk some QBs next week.
Let's do it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, tune in again next week to the Big Ten show, Believe in the Big Ten, here on the Believe Podcast Network.